I think dating not only as a bisexual man, but as a person of color, as a guy who doesn't really fit in the masculine norms. And you'd think it'd be easy in London, and somehow it's the worst. It's the pits. London dating is the pits.
Hey, my bis and allies. Welcome back to another episode of Bisexual Behavior. I'm your host, Talia Cass. I've been so excited to share this episode with you all. It's been in the works for a little bit. Actually, a couple weeks ago, I asked my listeners on Instagram what kind of topics that you want to hear. And I got a lot of messages, but the most prominent answer, and honestly the first ones that I received, were all how people want to hear more about bisexual men. And I 100% agree. This is something that I've been wanting to do more often, is interview different bisexual men who, are very well versed in the topic. So I discovered this book called Bisexual Men Exist, and I decided to purchase it and started reading it, and I thought, oh my god, I have to get the writer on here. He'd be perfect to interview. So I reached out to the writer Vaneet Mehta. He is not only a writer, but he's a bi activist. He started the hashtag #BiMenExist, and I'm going to let you listen because we'll talk about it a lot more, but this is such a fun episode, not just because it's a great topic, but we had a lot of fun. Vaneet is super funny. He had me laughing the whole time. I think you're all really going to enjoy it. Also, I just celebrated 1 year of recording the podcast, which is absolutely insane. I've been dreaming of having a podcast for years, and honestly, it's just made me grow so much as a person. So thank you so much for everyone for your support, and here's to another year of bisexual behavior. Welcome, Vaneet. It's so great to have you.
Hi, so good to be here.
You are our first international guest. I don't know if you're aware, I'm American. I live in upstate New York.
I can guess by the flag in the background.
Oh, yeah.
That's like the Human Rights Campaign logo, right?
It is, yes. Yeah. I actually recorded my closet, so I was like, I have to make it festive for the podcast somehow. So
Amazing.
So you're in the UK?
Yeah, I am.
Great. So, Vaneet, you are an author, a published author. You are a bisexual activist and a software engineer, from what I saw online, which is pretty cool. Cool. So, so we're going to talk a lot more about your book and a lot more about you personally. But I figured, let's start with some light introductions so the listeners know who we are. You can follow my format. My name is Talia. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a cis white bisexual woman. What about you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Vaneet Mehta. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an Indian bisexual man born and raised in Southall in West London.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question I just am dying to ask you is, what is your most bisexual behavior?
Oh, you know what? I think it's the whole, I can't sit still kind of a thing. I never sit normally. I always gotta find the most awkward way to sit. I love peace signs. I always do peace signs. And I do notice I do finger guns. I don't actively, purposely do them, but I just kind of, every now and then I'm like, yes. And I'm like, where did you come from?
I know, right? It just happens naturally. I'm just like, oh, wait, no, maybe I shouldn't do that. That's awkward. But it's so funny because my most bisexual behavior is also sitting very strange. And that is the joke in my office that I work in is Talia always has this weird leg thing where there's a leg up. I keep moving. I just can't get comfortable. I don't know if that has to do with ADHD, but
I think there's an overlap. I think there's a big overlap, honestly.
For sure, definitely. So, Vaneet, I would love to talk about your book, which is incredible. It's so well researched. I feel like even if you aren't bisexual or identify as a man, I just think it's a really informative, great read on the bisexual man experience. So it's called Bisexual Men Exist. So how did that come about? How did you start writing that? What was kind of your journey, so to speak?
So for me, it kind of started all from a hashtag that I made online in 2019. And I made a hashtag, which is the same one as the title of the book, Bisexual Men Exist. And I made that in response to biphobia and biracia that I was seeing on Twitter, our favorite place. And it was targeted very specifically towards bisexual men. it was kind of saying, "Oh, you don't exist. You're just gay, or ruining your wife's life and that kind of stuff." And it was really difficult seeing that. And so often when I see this kind of stuff, I do what everyone on Twitter always does: just go, right, now we're gonna fight. I'm gonna quote tweet to you, and we're gonna talk about it, and we're gonna like put you on blast and all that kind of stuff. And I just didn't want to get into that. I really wanted to just have some happiness, some like positive moment. So I was like, you know what? Let's not do this time. How about, why don't we all just share a picture of ourselves and share some joy and celebrate ourselves a little bit. And I thought it would really help everyone else feel a little better. And also, anyone who was like me a few years ago could see that and go, oh, it's fine. There's a lot of bisexual men. Like, I can ignore all the awful stuff that people are saying because it's not true. And when I did it again in 2020, for the very similar reason, it trended. Human Rights Campaign actually tweeted it out, as well as GLAD and Pink News and so many other outlets. There were loads of articles about it, and really it was something that, as a bisexual man myself, I had struggled with accepting myself as a bisexual man and accepting my bisexuality. And I just thought that we needed to have the conversation. I think bisexuality doesn't often get to have a conversation about the issues that we face, and bisexual men like often quite less. A lot often the idea of bisexuality is sort of a middle class white woman, and you don't really get conversations outside of that. And so I really wanted to try and bring that to the forefront, and try and bring that conversation to the limelight and talk about our experiences, and the way that we are erased. Because I think the erasure in the bisexual community is so often quite gendered. And so it was trying to create that conversation of the erasure that we experience and the way that it specifically impacts bisexual men.
Yeah. So something you mentioned that I think is really important is that, it, bisexuality is always perceived into being a middle class bisexual woman. And I think bisexual women have a very different experience because they're seen as straight or sexualized, whereas bisexual men are seen as they're just gay, that they're
Yeah.
not valid. And what do you think kind of goes into that perception that bisexual men are just actually gay when it's kind of a different look when it comes to bisexual women?
Yeah, I think so. It's a concept that I talk about in my book called phallocentrism, and it really kind of stems from this idea of patriarchy and the male-dominated environment. But it kind of gives a lot of power to the penis, like this mythical object, the penis. And when people are penetrated by, if you have attraction to, if you have experiences with this so-called penis, it alters you, it changes you, it defines you. And you see this in a lot of different facets in society, not just with queerness. So you see, um, for example, the sort of purity culture and the idea that virginal status amongst women is put in such high regard, is that idea of like, when a woman is penetrated, she is changed, something is altered in her. You get all of those really crude ideas of like, oh, well, a woman who had a lot of dicks in her, it's, a lock with many keys, it's like less valuable. And so it all comes back to this idea of phallocentrism, and that what plays into the way bisexual people experience. I mean, firstly, bisexual non-binary people are completely erased from the conversation because we have again this idea of binaries, and the same way that we only see straight and gay as valid, we only see male and female as valid, which is a different concept which we can talk about later. But phallocentrism impacts us here, and so it's bisexual women have sex with men. It's very cisnormative. It's how you have sex with men, therefore you have sex with penises, and that alters you, that changes you, that defines your identity. So you're seen as straight. And bisexual men are again penetrated by penises, have attraction to penises, have had those experiences, and therefore they're seen as gay because it changes you. There's no way for you to come back from that after you've had that experience.
So another thing that you mentioned in your book is it was like a statistic that really shocked me is that I think it's 81% of women would not date a bisexual man, which is insane to me. And
Yeah.
especially considering that a big portion of people identify as bisexual or maybe, kind of fit within that spectrum in some way. So could you talk about what goes behind women deciding that they don't want to be with bisexual men?
Yeah, I think it again comes back to this idea of, firstly, we have this idea of the binaries. So you have it's called monosexism. So it's the only giving legitimacy to gay and straight monosexual identities. So we are only attracted to a single gender, whilst erasing anything else that can exist in between or outside of that. And so when it comes to that plus phallocentrism, it means that bisexual men are seen as gay. And so it's either these women see us as actually gay, they see us as closeted, they see us as eventually going to leave them for a man, they see us as going to cheat on them, they see us as potentially vectors of disease, which is a whole other topic of conversation. Or if they don't necessarily see us as gay, they see us as less than. They see us as less than a man because we are having sex with penises. We are There's an idea of allocentrism robbing you of your masculinity. When you're penetrated, something is taken away from you, so you're seen as lesser. And even if they aren't necessarily a woman who's going, "I need my man to be a man," uh, it's it's sometimes subconscious. So even if they aren't consciously doing it, it's subconsciously going, "Oh, but they're not going to be able to be a man in the way that I need it." Um, it's in the same way that gay men are often seen as feminine because we're seen as having sex with men in the same way that gay men do. We're seen as feminine, and therefore we're unable to provide that masculine energy that they may need or desire, even if it's not consciously.
Yeah, it's interesting that, phallocentrism, which you mentioned, it plays such a huge role out like in terms of sexual identities and how women perceive men too. But something that you talk a lot about in your book too is, the AIDS epidemic and how
Yeah.
that kind of changed the way people look at bisexual men too as like vectors of a disease. And I think that plays into a lot of women saying, that they won't date bisexual men, even if that might not be the initial thought that they have for the reason being. And I bring this up because even when I came out, I remember I was talking to a relative about how I could only see myself dating like women or bisexual men in the future. And I remember my relative said, but they're a higher risk of STIs and
Yeah.
AIDS and all this stuff. And this is a person who is a boomer and they were alive during, the peak of the epidemic. So could you talk a little bit about that history of AIDS and how that really impacted people's view on bisexual men?
Yeah, I mean, so like in terms of firstly the community as a whole, the AIDS epidemic really put the stigma on queer men and queer people in general in terms of being a vector for disease, in terms of more likely to have STIs or HIV, that we're more risky with the way that we have sex, which is categorically not true.
Mhm.
None of that's true. If anything, I know more gay people and queer people and bi people who are more likely to go and get tested regularly, more likely to be more mindful of safer sex and what you do in terms of having safer sex. I don't know any straight people who ever talk about going to the clinic. Not a single one. And if it is, it's more likely women than men.
I was
Like
just gonna say because women or men that I've dated in the past, straight men, like they don't get tested as frequently as I
no,
would or any other women that I know that would. So it's really interesting that that's the case.
yeah. And then when you then talk about bisexual men specifically, during the 80s, there was a big moment which doesn't get talked about enough, but there was a big moment in the 80s where bisexual men in particular, were painted as a vector for disease. It gave birth to what is called the bisexual bridge theory, which is the idea that bisexual men are bridging the gap between the gay community and the straight community. AIDS and HIV was seen as largely as a gay disease, and that's what a lot of the wider society labeled it as, and therefore we started being called dirty and being called infectious and all of this stuff. And so they said that's a gay disease that doesn't affect us. We're good, we're pure, we're wholesome. It comes into the purity culture and Christianity. It's all mixed in there. And so when it came to straight people getting infected, bisexual men were the people who were blamed, not the straight people who weren't ever getting tested, not the straight people who don't do safer sex. It was us. And there was a big headline at the bottom of the first page of the New York Times that was AIDS Spectre for Women, the Bisexual Man. And that's really what started this. There were articles in Cosmo and in Newsweek and so many other outlets that painted bisexual men as the reason why straight women and even their unborn babies, it literally has that in the content, is the
Wow.
reason why they're getting HIV. We were basically labeled as baby killers.
Oh my God.
So, which is crazy.
That's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you look at this and you go, is it any wonder that bisexual men are nervous about coming out, that we're misunderstood, like that women won't date us? Because we're seen as this problem. We're seen as this vector for disease. We're seen as something that's going to cause the straight community to be infected. And there's articles even as recently as 2014 saying that we're the reason why women are getting HIV. So it's not something that's gone away.
Wow. Even in 2014, that's crazy to
Yeah.
hear that that was a headline.
Yeah,
But
from the New York Post.
and oh wow.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, it's like, so beforehand, men were not, they could not be bisexual. Bisexuality wasn't seen as a thing until they could blame something on bisexual
Yeah.
men, and suddenly they do exist.
Yeah.
And then, so something you talk also about in your book, I feel like I'm bringing up your book a lot, and I want everyone to read it. There's so much more that you talk about outside of what we're talking about here today. But you mentioned a lot about media representation and
Yeah.
how the views of bisexual men, it's like confusing. It's hard to tell that they're actually bisexual. There's a lot of missed opportunities of how you can kind of talk about a fluid sexuality in TV. And I'm trying to think of a specific example you talk about. Like you talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and how she goes, instead of saying that she's bisexual, she goes as full gay, even though she had
Yeah.
past experiences with men. How do you think that like contributes to erasure of bisexuality, and how do you think that can be very harmful to the community? Sorry, that was
Yeah.
a loaded question.
No, I think it's really difficult. I think, my experience when I was growing up is I didn't see anything on
Mhm.
bisexuality. And I think that that's a really common experience. Everyone that I spoke to for my book said a similar thing, that they just weren't even aware that it was a thing they
Right.
could be. They weren't aware it was an option. And it's because of the complete lack of representation and education. If you can't see yourself,
Mhm.
how do you know it's a thing that you can be? It wasn't even in my vocabulary. Like, this wasn't a word I knew. So how could I be it? And where are you going to learn that from if no one's ever teaching it to you? And so I think that that is the harm that has been done, and in some ways still continues to be done. I think, there's a lot that you can talk about when it comes to sort of negative stereotypes, and I think that you can debate them to the end of the earth of like, well, some people see them as negative, some people see them as like reclaiming. There's a lot of different ways to see it. But I think the biggest problem in media representation for bisexual people is that so often it just doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It just isn't there. People often ask me, oh, what is your favorite representation of bisexual men? And I'm like, can I think of more than like one, maybe? And even when you do start thinking of them, you go, well, are they ever named as bisexual? Probably not. Or pansexual, m-spec, or any identity. There's
Right.
so few that are named. And when it comes to stuff like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and even, there was 90210, which I mentioned as well in my book, is back then it was often like reinforcing this binary of someone, once you have had this queer experience, it is you awakening to your actual identity, which is lesbian or gay. And you then finally shed all of the old stuff and you become that identity. And there's never any like, even if these people did end up as lesbian or gay, there's never a real exploration in maybe I'm this thing instead. Even if that's not where they ended up, that's cool. But when there was a whole episode where Willow was having a moment where her ex-boyfriend had come back and she still had really strong feelings for him, and they kind of left that really open-ended of like, oh, I do still love you and I will always love you, but I also love her and I want to see where I go with her and I want to be with her. And that could have still been a maybe I'm bisexual moment, but it was never named. And then eventually it's just I only like women, and they kind of tried to keep reinforcing that. And ultimately that's experience that a lot of people do have. I don't want to take away from that. I don't want to say, well, that's the only thing that exists. It must be bisexual. It can't ever be anything else. But I think that was so often done, and there was never any exploration of anything else. That was the problem. And even today, we get people who they're clearly bisexual, but they're not named. And when they're not named, you then get that projection of that experience again of, well, they were in a relationship with a, she was in a relationship with a man, now she's in a relationship with a woman. Clearly she's now a lesbian and she's realized she's a lesbian. Because they never name it. They never feel the need to name it. And they go, well, why is it important? And I'm like, well, everyone's calling her a lesbian now. Or is it bi? No one knows. And we can project our own feelings onto it as well. We can go, well, I think she's bi because this. But it leaves us out in the cold because eventually people are going to mislabel her and they're going to say it's this, and it just leaves us out in the cold, you know?
Yeah, that's why using the actual label can be really important, whether that's bisexual, pansexual, or queer. And even like, so another example you mentioned was The Good Place. And I love The Good Place. It's one of my favorite sitcoms. And I love that they mention Eleanor is bisexual, which is great that they mention that. But they don't show her like exploring her bisexuality outside of talking about sex, I've noticed. Like it's usually just talking about how someone's attractive. There's no kind of romance discussion, so it's kind of hard to pinpoint what bisexuality meant to her. And I feel like this
I also don't think she ever says that that's my label. I think the only
That's
time I
true.
ever see her say it is she says it to Chidi at one point and goes like, people can be bisexual, like what's the problem? But never says that's what she is. And
So true.
I think so often people will just see her like finding another woman hot, which is what you're saying. It's just that whole sexual attraction, and go, well, loads of women find other women hot. That's just normal. Like, and it's like, okay, cool. So that's not bisexual representation, really.
Yeah. And on the other end of the spectrum, so saying it can be confusing for bisexual people seeing someone go from dating the opposite gender to dating the same sex and having this realization, well, I'm actually gay, I'm actually a lesbian. And I think it can be confusing for bi people watching that because they think that that's what their journey has to look like. I know for me, specifically when I came out as bisexual, there were 2 years where I was just forcing myself to just identify as a lesbian and feel like, okay, this makes so much sense. Like, this is why this relationship didn't work out. When in reality, you can just be bisexual and that's what it is and it's fine. Like it doesn't have to be deeper than that. So I think it can be very confusing. And so seeing like more celebrities using the term bisexual, I think is really important. Specifically, I'm thinking of Lil Nas X, who has been very openly gay for a very long time, and then had this tweet that said, would y'all for real be mad if I came out as bisexual? Which is like the weirdest way to say that you're bisexual, because it's like implying that people would be mad, which you don't see him saying that about coming out as gay. I think you actually wrote an article about it. So
I did because I saw that and I was like, he's so real for that. Because honestly, I mean, like, people were mad when he came out as gay because like a lot of the black community, and I know that he had a backlash from all of that. But it's the fact that he's come out as gay and yet is still scared to come out in a different way, where it's like fundamentally what changes. And there's such an interesting conversation to be had there of the fact that even though he's openly out and openly queer, there's still a stigma of using the word bi, specifically that word, because has no problem saying gay. He has no problem like talking about having sex with Satan and all of this kind of stuff. He has no problem saying any of this. But yet there's a stigma around bi to the point where he's going, would you be mad? Would I have backlash? And
like, I will give Satan a lap dance, but being bi, I'm a little nervous about.
Right.
Like that.
And there's so much to be said there. Of the reason why he's so scared is that he knows that a lot of people are going to think that he's going back in the closet. A lot of people think he's going to be a traitor to the community, that he's given up, that he was queer baiting, which is a word people need to stop using because they don't know how to use it. They're going to... I can see the conversations, and so could he. And I think it's a really common experience for bisexual people to be very acutely aware of how everyone will see them if they use that term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so often the reason why people don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to use it because they know, even if that's what they are, they know how everyone else is going to see them.
I even see that kind of negativity toward the word bisexual when people choose to go by queer or pansexual, and not
Yeah.
saying that those are not, valid identities, because of course they are. But I think that people who choose those terms often do so because they feel like bisexual is such a negative connotation, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to, oh, well, it's a binary term, things like that, where
Yeah.
there's this misunderstanding. And it's like all of these negative things are put specifically toward bisexuality, but not
Yeah.
those other sexualities, which is interesting.
Because sometimes it comes from those people not knowing what bisexual is or thinking it's binary. And for some people, I don't think bisexual is a binary, but I'm really, really tired of having to constantly tell people it's not a
Yes.
binary. So I would rather just use a different word because I'm sick of it.
Yeah,
And
which is no shame. I get that.
yeah, and then for some people, it's just this word feels better to me, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's totally valid.
Very valid.
And it's really difficult because then you also get the other backlash where some people are like, well, I'm probably more pansexual, but I use bisexual because no one knows what pansexual is. And some people, I say pansexual and they go, oh, you're attracted to kitchen appliances. And it's
Oh my God.
And it's like, have you considered not talking instead? Like,
so I just want to kind of circle back. And so we talked a lot about your book and how, in general, in society, how bisexual men are kind of looked down upon. I kind of want to circle back and talk about your experience specifically. And I know that you've had some struggles. You talk about this in your book and different articles about kind of accepting it to yourself. So if you're comfortable, would you like to share kind of your own journey and what that looked like?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, when I first started having attraction to more than one gender, I didn't even know the word existed. So I think I started experiencing attraction when I was 10 or 11, and I was like, oh, what's this? What does this mean? And like you pointed out, it's when you keep seeing this representation in media, you think that needs to be your story. And so I thought my story was I'm gay and I'm just need to accept that. And then anytime I had an attraction to a woman, I was like, well, then what does that mean? I have a crush on her, so I don't understand. And ultimately, I just kept myself in the closet because I knew how gay people were, what people's views were on gay people and homosexuality. So I was just like, well, I will just keep myself in the closet. No one believed it because the way masculinity is constructed and the way I didn't fit into that meant people thought I was gay anyway. But if I said, actually, yeah, I am, the hardship would have been worse. So I kept it down. I kept it to one side. And it wasn't until I was 17 that I first started having attraction to more than, I knew the word for attraction to more than one gender.
Right.
And actually it wasn't bisexual I first learned, it was bi-curious. And it was
of course.
and it was because someone in my school came out as bi-curious. And they were like, well, I'm attracted to men. It was a woman, and she was like, I'm attracted to men, but I also am curious about women and maybe want to explore that and stuff, etc., etc. And everyone thought it was a joke. Everyone laughed. And everyone was like, that's ridiculous. That's not a thing. You're a lesbian. Just say you're a lesbian. It's fine. Just be a lesbian. It wasn't fine. They would have been massively homophobic towards her.
Right.
But they were like, it's fine. Just come out as a lesbian. If you're a lesbian, just say it. And so that conversation meant that even though I'd learnt the word, I couldn't accept that as a term I could be because everyone said it's not real, right? So that's not a term. And it made it really difficult. And everything was reinforcing the fact that I couldn't be that term. 90210, which is the one I mentioned earlier, had this similar storyline to Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where someone had been straight the whole time until he had sex with a man, and then suddenly, oh, I'm gay then. And then they reveal that actually he'd been hiding it the whole time, and he was doing all of this stuff with women to like put his sexuality to one side. And that became really difficult to watch because I was watching it with someone who I was roommates with, who was saying, oh, yeah, he's gay. Obviously he's gay. When he hadn't revealed that yet. Just had sex with a man. And it's like, well, he's gay then. And I kind of tested like rocked the boat a little bit and tested the waters and was like, what if he's bi? It's like, no, can't be. He's had sex with a man. You can't come back from that. And I was like, okay. And so I was constantly having this reinforcement that it was one or the other. I wasn't seeing bisexual people. No one was coming out as bisexual. They weren't in my life. They weren't in the media. They weren't being taught about them. And so I just didn't see that as something I could be. And it really wasn't until I was 24 that I finally came out. And that was because I couldn't deny that attraction anymore. I found ways to deny it up until that point. I was like, well, I don't want to have sex with a man, so, and I'm not romantically interested in them. So just because I'm sexually turned on by them, that doesn't mean I want to have sex with them. I couldn't imagine dating one. I couldn't imagine holding hands or kissing them. So
Classic last words.
Yeah, right. And it wasn't until I then had a crush on a guy, and that was my first crush on a guy, like upper crush, that I was like, okay, this means something, and I just had to come out, and I don't know why I just decided bisexual rather than gay, because up until that point I thought it was just gay, but it was the only term that made sense. I just had so many crushes on women that I was like, I'm just gonna try this word because I just don't understand how it could be gay. It just wouldn't make sense to me. And so I did, and here we are.
Yay! And how do you feel now about identifying as bisexual?
Good. I mean, like, I think it's still difficult. I really thought that I came out and then it's like, oh, cool, now everything's just resolved. And I don't think those feelings of self-doubt ever actually go away, which is a really difficult thing to contend with. And it's something that you hear a lot in the community of, like, actually those feelings just don't disappear, which is hard. It's rough. Now I'm in a relationship with a man and I'm kind of sometimes go, is my identity even a thing anymore? Does it mean anything anymore? Does anyone ever see me as this anymore? What if I'm actually not attracted to women anymore because I am now in a relationship with a man and I'm happy and I'm never gonna do anything with a woman? Or I'm monogamous at the moment, who knows? And so I'm just like, well, does this mean anything then? And that's really difficult to contend with as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that. One of my past interviews, he mentioned this idea of grief, of when you're bisexual, no matter what type of relationship you are in, there's still grieving some part of your identity, right? So if you're in a heterosexual relationship, you're grieving that queer side of you, or you're in a same-sex relationship, you're grieving, the potential relationship with an opposite sex. And I don't think everyone experiences that, but I think depending on your situation, there is some kind of, kind of battling your head whether or not you're queer enough or if you're still bi, there's still always going to be that feeling. So I thought it was interesting you mentioned that, because I think that's always been my biggest struggle with my bisexuality. Even having this podcast every day, I'm like, am I a fraud? Which is, so I realize it's insane. And you even mentioning this when you are an author of a book about bisexuality,
right.
It's such a common bisexual experience. And even though we all have very different experiences at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of bisexual, that's like the common theme of just like feeling like, am I only valid if I'm single and sleeping with all different types of genders? Like what makes bisexuality valid? So, but I appreciate you sharing your story there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it is really common. I've not met a single person who doesn't deal with it. I'm sure there are people who are like, no, I'm great. I'm sure if you speak to a polyamorous bi person, they'll be like, no, I'm cool, I'm good. So maybe that's the trick. But I don't know. I think it is really difficult. It's one of those things where, for all my life I've been told I'm gay and I've been told I should be gay, and now I'm in a relationship with a man, and it's like, was all of this for nothing? Should I have just been gay and then I would have just been fine, I guess? I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult to think about sometimes.
How do you think being bisexual has affected your dating life? I mean, now you have a monogamous partner, which is incredible, but what was it like kind of before you landed in that situation?
I hated it.
Oh, no.
I hated dating. And I honestly gave up just before I met my partner. So it's really weird that it then came about. because I was like, no, I'm done with dating. I put on a really long dramatic post on social media as everyone does. Again, famous last words.
Of
I'm
course, yes.
I'm like done with dating. I never want to date again. Because the apps just felt insane.
Mhm.
Like I think dating not only as a bisexual man, but as a person of color, as a guy who doesn't really fit in the masculine norms. And you'd think it'd be easy in London, and somehow it's the worst. It's the pits. London dating is the pits. When I went to New York and I found the grid just like pop in, I was like, where is this energy in London? Um,
Interesting.
I found it really difficult. Prior to even coming out, I thought it was really difficult because even when I was like, people go, well, you're attracted to women, you could still date women. Most women thought I was gay. And
Mhm.
even when I was seen with a woman, um, where people would assume we were dating, they thought it was ridiculous that she would date me. Even if we weren't even dating, I was just with a woman who was a friend, and people would go, "Oh no, don't date him. Like I could do better. Like I could be better for you," because they saw me as this sort of emasculated version of a man. They saw me as lesser. They saw me as someone who couldn't provide. And so even when I was pictured with a woman who people assumed I was dating, people would mock me. People would think if I was lesser. People wouldn't see me. People would still see me as gay. And so I had a really difficult time trying to even date women when I was in the closet, because no one would see me as an option. It's made worse by race because, like, I'm
Mhm.
expected to be a certain way, and people already don't want to date Indian men. It's a really difficult thing to deal with. And when I entered the community, I experienced the same thing. Um, some guys, people would think that I'm closeted. Some people think I haven't come out all the way. I remember one time I put bisexual actually in my bio on Grinder, and one guy was like, "Oh yeah, we don't have to like do anything if you don't want to." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you said bisexual. I thought you might not want to have sex, or you might not be." And I was like, do you know what bisexual means? I'm really confused where this comes from. Um,
Oh my gosh.
and so yeah, it was a thing that I constantly had to contend with. And then when you play race into it and
Mhm.
and my femininity into it, it became a lot more difficult. It was
Mhm.
everyone wanting this muscled white guy, and it was something I just didn't fit into. And so me putting the bisexuality into it as well, just yeah, it just made it a really heavy concoction of like you're gonna die alone. Like that is it.
Yeah,
Like,
something I've been learning since I came out is that queer people are not, it's not as an inclusive space as you would assume. I
yeah,
feel like there's a lot of whitewashing when it comes to Pride Month, to just queer spaces in general
yeah,
and like dating. And I've been learning a lot about that. Also, I feel like people need to change their mindset on bisexual men because I see it as bisexual men are like they're more in touch with themselves, their emotions, and their needs, and
yeah,
might have more experience being with different genders, so they might have a broader understanding in relationships. And I feel like people
yeah,
don't like really put that together. But all I'm
yeah.
saying is bisexual people are superior. So
I think it's really difficult when we talk about the queer community. A lot of people think that somehow we're all better than
Mhm.
the larger society. We're all better than the cishet people outside of us. And it's just categorically not true.
Mhm.
Because ultimately, the queer community is nothing if not a microcosm of the wider society. And
Right.
a lot of the stuff that we get taught is something that is ingrained that we haven't unlearned, unless we unlearn it, unless we do that work. And I don't think a lot of people do. A lot of people go, I have found my space, I am now safe, and that is it. And at what point is the community even a community anymore? Because for me, a community is about looking after one another.
Yeah,
And I don't know if I can positively say that that is the case. I think there are definitely parts of the community who really care and make sure that the whole community is cared for. But I don't think enough people are doing that work.
I
Not
agree.
not people that you meet on a day to day basis in the community. And I think that is a problem. And so you do get racism and bottom shaming and biphobia and transphobia. All of that still exists in our community. You get stuff like get the L out, which is trying to take the L out of LGBT because they think that the trans people have taken over. You get people using queer and then only talking about gay people. I've seen it so often where people are like blah 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 and they're talking about queer and blah, and the only people that they've got on board that are involved in the conversation that they talk about in their books or their pieces of media are gay people. And that's not what queer means. And I think there's a real problem there that not a lot of people are talking about. And I think you're right when it comes to bisexuality. I think there's a fine line to play there because you also don't want to lean into this like fetishistic idea that is coming up
Right.
these days
Yep.
of like bisexual men are better because ultimately we're all just humans.
Yeah.
But I think there is something to say about the fact that bisexual people are more likely to put in the work than say straight people, where I'm more likely to have done that self-analysis because to come out means doing self-analysis on who you are, on what you are, on what you like. Bisexual men can be flawed as well. We're not. There's no such thing as like a bisexual man who's not a predator or a bisexual man who's hasn't done like harassed a woman or so on and so forth. That all exists. But I think there is something to be said about the fact that we are more likely to have done a self-analysis on ourselves and more likely to know ourselves, and that is more likely to produce a better environment to date in because they're going to be that more open and more communicative with a partner.
Absolutely. And so beautifully said. And that's not to say that there aren't straight men out there who can be open and communicative in a relationship. There absolutely are. But I find that, at least maybe this is just my perspective, but I find that other bisexual people having that understanding is just so nice. Even if,
definitely.
you're in a relationship with a cis straight person, it's just, there's a different kind of intimacy and communication and just acceptance of, the LGBT community, which is really nice. But
because I definitely think if I was still single, I don't think I could ever date a cis allo het woman. I don't envision that for myself. I just think that comes with a lot of heteronormativity, a lot of expectation from me,
right?
That I just don't enjoy. So I just wouldn't do it. So it just wouldn't work, really.
Definitely. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit because we're getting a little bit closer on time. But question for you: do you ever use Reddit?
I use Reddit very minimally. But I would love. I like the posts on like what is that? I am the asshole and stuff like that.
Yes.
That is the only time I like engage with Reddit because I love that kind of crap.
I love those, especially when you see the post where somebody is clearly the asshole and then they respond to the comments. They're like, "Oh God, I've got to do some deep thinking." And I'm like, we love someone who can like have inner monologues and actually think about the bad shit that they're doing.
I haven't ever seen the self-growth ones. I really love the ones where it's just like. Where it's just like, am I the arsehole? Who is the worst person ever to exist? Am I the arsehole? And it's like, I wonder if you're the arsehole. I wonder.
But those are really addicting. Yeah. But I bring it up because I have a new segment. It's called Found on Reddit. And basically, amazing. I go through the bisexual subreddit because Reddit was a huge part of my coming out journey when I was still trying to figure out my bisexuality. That was like essentially my community because I didn't have a lot of bisexual people around me. And I started to notice that I was seeing a lot of the same questions. And I thought, like, let's just talk about it on the podcast. So I found one that I wanted to talk about today. It's actually from a parent, which I haven't seen a lot on this thread before. So let's dive into it. So it's called, "Our daughter came out as bisexual. What else can we do to support her without being weird about it?"
That's so cute.
It's so cute. It gets even cuter, trust me. This is normally the ones I read are pretty negative, so this is like a nice one to hear. "Ever since our kids have been old enough to understand, we've talked about LGBTQ issues and issues of justice. My wife and I have LGBTQ friends, our babysitter's trans, and when we talk to our kids, we talk about if you ever get married and whether you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, our focus is whether that person treats you well. Like, kudos to this family. We are at
Honestly.
Pride. Yeah, right? We are at Pride on Friday, and after that, our almost 13-year-old let us know that she's bisexual. We talked to her and told her that we love her and that we're proud of her. And then I said, "It seems like you don't think this is a big deal. Is that right?" And she laughed and nodded, which is great. Shout out to Gen Z / Alpha. For real, that's to think that's not a big deal, because
Yeah.
that, for me, that was a huge deal. So if that's the case, we probably don't know to adorn our house with bisexual pride flags and go crazy. She got one at Pride. So since she truly thinks it isn't that big of a deal, what can we do to continue to support her, but in a chill way?
I mean, it kind of sounds like they're doing everything right. And
So there,
it's
yeah,
wild. It's wild to me that they're like, we're doing everything. What more can we do? And I'm like, can you please be my parents? Maybe that would help. Like,
right? Oh my gosh. But like, seriously, they're checking off all of like everything. So it's they're going to Pride, they're using inclusive language, they're surrounding their family around LGBTQ people, they're being sensitive and asking the community how they can support their bisexual child. Like, I just, they're I don't know what else they could do. I feel
yeah.
like this is the best way to support in a chill way, for sure.
I honestly think it's just always being available to have a conversation, which it kind of sounds like they
Mhm.
already are.
Yeah.
I think inclusive language is great. So like even being like more inclusive, like saying boyfriend and girlfriend, say partner,
Yes.
say like are you dating anyone, or like oh instead of being like is there a cute boy you like is there a cute person you like, you
Yes.
know. I think so often people then go back to those binaries and it's like no, but they could date a non-binary person, so like
Mhm.
let's open it up. And I think just always being open to a conversation about the struggles that they're dealing with. I think educating themselves on the struggles that bisexual people face will go a long way in terms of being available for those conversations. And I think that that's a really good way to do it in a chill way where you're not like being intrusive or asking them a bunch of questions,
Mhm.
but all you're doing is like educating yourself so that you are capable, should the moment arise, to help them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's it doesn't sound like they're going to be missing that beat because it sounds like they've got this all sorted.
Mhm.
But I think that that's the beat that a lot of people miss when they talk about acceptance. Is they go, well, I will accept you because like whatever you do, it's okay. But it's like, right, but is my trauma okay? Is
Mhm.
my mental health issues okay? If I'm acting out because of the stuff that I've had to deal with, is that okay? And so often people don't get that part. It's something that
Right.
I dealt with my family, where like my brother and sister, they were like, "Oh, you know, we're always accepting, blah blah blah," but yet didn't understand why I had so much of an issue with my relationship with my dad. And they were like, "Well, he's treated you well. He put a roof over your head and fed you." And I'm like, "Okay, so he did the basics as a parent."
Right. You chose
Um,
to have children, so that's what you have to provide. That's part of
yeah,
it.
like well done, well done. Did you
Yeah.
want a gold star for that? But didn't understand that there was emotional trauma there. Didn't
You're right.
understand that there was baggage there. And so when I would act out to my dad, when I would get frustrated with him, they'll go, "What's your problem? Why do you treat him like that?" And I'll go, "He hasn't treated me well emotionally. There's a lot of damage there because he was the one who told me to grow up and stop being a girl. He was the one who constantly made comments about homophobic comments and like other stuff like that, which made me feel like I couldn't be myself. And ultimately that has harmed me. And so it's remembering that there's going to be issues that they're going to have to deal with, and they're more likely to have to deal with issues around mental health or sexual health, and really being mindful, like especially like a bisexual woman, they're gonna be fetishized.
Right.
They're gonna have to deal with sexual violence. It's being aware of what you have to do in those situations, and really helping them with their trauma, with their emotional baggage, and accepting that. Because I think a lot of time people will accept their identity, but not accept all the stuff that could come out of the issues they deal with because of their identity, the biphobia and biracia, and how that leads to mental health and sexual health issues. So yeah,
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that they should read your book, of course.
of course, read my back.
So speaking of which, how can people purchase your book?
So I always say if you have a local queer bookshop, they're more than likely to stock it, I would hope.
Mhm.
If not, get them to order it in because I always try and get people to support their local queer bookshop. If that's not available to you, I recommend bookshop.org because that money then goes to local bookshops and independent bookshops as well. Otherwise, you can find it in all the big bookshops that you know and potentially love, like Barnes and
Mhm.
Noble or Amazon. It should be available there too, and you can get it online or in store.
And where can people find you and support you?
So I have a very professional handle. It's called
Oh,
Nintendo Mad 888. Uh,
love
it,
it.
it's very classy. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm more active on Twitter, but if you follow me on Instagram, I will. You can also interact with me there. My DMs are always open, so if you want to have a chat, I will hopefully see your message. Sometimes it
Mhm.
gets buried under the like requests, but I
Oh,
will
yeah.
find it. So yeah, you can reach me there. I have a website as well, so you can just like if you Google my name, honestly, it makes me sound like so snobby when I say it, but like no one has this name, so that's why.
Mhm.
If you Google my name, you can find my website, you can find my Medium blog, so you can find other ways to interact with me too.
Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. Just happy Pride Month, I guess.
Happy Pride Month. Thank you so much for joining. This has been so nice talking to you. I love your
So
book. I really want everyone to read it, no matter what identity you have. I just feel like it's very educational. Like the fact that you incorporated individual stories and did like your own in-depth research, I just felt like it was probably the most well-written book I've read about bisexuality. So kudos to
thank
you.
you. Thank
And
you
it was
so
so
much.
lovely to meet you.
So
Of
lovely
course,
to
of
talk to
course.
you.
Yes. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Hey listeners, you know I'm obsessed with finding all the best queer content out there. Well, I discovered another podcast I think you will all enjoy, and it's called Misfit Media. Every Sunday, the host Delta shares personal experiences with topics like queerness, disability, fatness, and more in bingeable, bite-sized episodes. If you're looking for content that covers everything from sexuality and gender to mental health and intersectionalities, then this podcast should absolutely be added to your library. Pause this episode right now so you can subscribe to Misfit Media on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. I could honestly talk to Vaneet all day. That was such a fun recording. If you really want to learn more, I really, really recommend you buy the book Bisexual Men Exist. It's such a really informative read. I feel like a lot of people will read this and feel seen. So if you haven't yet, make sure to buy it. Also, this month, I've been getting a lot of feedback from listeners, specifically listeners who want to be on the podcast. I know that I've had a lot of listeners on the podcast in the past, and I'm thinking of a way to incorporate more listener interviews in a meaningful way, but will also still, continuing interviews with different people that I reach out to. So stay tuned. I'm going to have an announcement of what my plan is for having listener interviews because I think it's a really important part of bisexual behavior. And as you know, my whole big goal is just sharing other queer voices out there. And I think it's really important to keep doing that. So stay tuned for an announcement. I'm really excited to share kind of my next plans with you. But in the meantime, you can support the podcast by subscribing, rating, and reviewing. You can also follow Bisexual Behavior on Instagram, and you can follow me. My Instagram handle is at talia.tatiana. I'm also on TikTok. I think it's the same handle. I should probably know that. And, if you are really interested in being on the podcast or you want to share your story, just email me at bisexualbehaviorpod@gmail.com. Again, I promise I'm going to be getting back to everyone soon. I do have an update that's going to be coming with big plans for the podcast, so I'm really excited to share that with you all. But thank you again for continuing to listen to the podcast and supporting. We appreciate it. But until then, we'll see you next month. Okay, bye.